Okay guys, so I wanted to start a lesson here by going over some stuff that we talked about in our previous lesson, and I didn't write them all down, but for day 6 rectangles, if you want to write those things down, you can go back into my day 5. This is just basically a review. So for quadrilaterals, we got to know that you have 4 sides. For parallelograms, there's a bunch of different things that you need to look at to be sure if something's a parallelogram. But for example, opposite angles must be congruent, opposite sides must be congruent, opposite sides must be parallel, diagonals must be congruent, diagonals must bisect each other. And yeah, just go back into the other one and look at those and get those written down if you haven't written those down yet. But this should be an opportunity for you guys to kind of just think about it like a quiz. If you can fill this whole thing out, that would be great. Rectangles, the 2 things that we talked about, they have to have 90-degree angles, and then also diagonals are congruent. Those are the 2 things you need for rectangles. Continuing here, I don't really need to look at that right now. Don't worry about this flowchart for right now. That's just kind of like a way that you can figure out if something's a rectangle, a parallelogram, or a quadrilateral. You can check it out if you want, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. All right, so let's take these one at a time, and I'm actually not even in something that I can draw with right now. I just want to be quick about this one. The first shape here, I would be able to say, and now it wants you to check the boxes that it classifies, and you can check more than one box. So you can see if this is a quadrilateral, a parallelogram, a rectangle, or all 3. And on this one, I would say this one is all 3, because we have our diagonals are definitely congruent, which means it's a rectangle. And judging by up here, all these rectangles are listed as parallelograms, and all parallelograms are quadrilaterals. So if on any of these, if we see that see that it's a rectangle, that means all the other ones are true as well. This one I would definitely say is a rectangle, so I think all the other ones are true as well. You've got everything that you need to be able to classify that as a rectangle because our diagonals are congruent. Next one. I can't really say that my diagonals are congruent because from P to S, those only have the 1 marking. From R to Q, those have the 2 markings, so those aren't really necessarily, that's not necessarily a rectangle. And we can say it's a parallelogram because we know that those are bisecting each other, those 2 diagonals. So diagonals bisect each other there. So that makes it a parallelogram. And it is a quadrilateral too because all parallelograms are quadrilaterals. Next one here, this is also a rectangle. I know it's a rectangle because we've got 4 congruent angles, and if it's a 4-sided figure and all of those angles are congruent, they all would have to be 90 degrees since a quadrilateral has 360 degrees inside of it. So they all have to be 90, which makes it a rectangle, which makes all the other ones true as well. This one is not necessarily a rectangle because it doesn't say that all of our sides are congruent, or all of our angles, I should say. I would say that it is a parallelogram though, because one of our rules for a parallelogram is that opposite angles are congruent, which makes it a quadrilateral as well. Next one. This one is going to be just a quadrilateral. It doesn't have anything that would make it a parallelogram or a rectangle. There is a rule for a parallelogram that one set of opposite sides has to be congruent and parallel, but that's not where those markings should go. They should be on the same lines. So those 2 tick marks should be on the top and bottom instead of the 2 sides for it to be a parallelogram. Last one here. I would say that this one is definitely a rectangle. Now, it's kind of tricky to see, but the 2 on the right are definitely 90 degrees, and then it says the 2 on the left are congruent. Well, if it's a 4-sided figure, we've only got 180 degrees left to work with on the 2Q and the P angles. So if we split those in half, then they would both be 90 degrees, which means all 4 angles are 90 degrees, which makes it a rectangle, a parallelogram, and a quadrilateral. That's it for that lesson. That went pretty quick.